They called him the Beast of Bighorn, a man so large he blocked out the sun, and so silent, people rumored he had no tongue. In the harsh winter of 1876, every woman in the Wyoming Territory refused to look him in the eye, except for one desperate soul with nowhere left to run. Everyone told Clara she was signing her death warrant when she climbed onto his wagon. But what she found inside that lonely cabin wasn't a monster. It was a secret that would shake the entire frontier. This is the true, untold story of Silas Kincaid and Clara Sutcliffe, a tale of danger, betrayal, and a love that survived the coldest winter on record. Let's ride. October 14th, 1876. Iron Creek, Wyoming Territory. The mud in Iron Creek was not just dirt and water. It was a living thing that swallowed boots and hope in equal measure. Clara May Sutcliffe stood on the wooden platform of the train station, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of a carpet bag that contained everything she owned in this world. 2 dresses, a Bible, and a stolen silver locket she prayed no one would ever look for. She was 22, but the soot on her face and the hollows under her eyes made her look older. She wasn't a mail-order bride by choice. She was a fugitive from a life in Chicago that had tried to crush her, and the matrimonial agency was the only ticket out. "Next lot!" The voice of Mayor Beaufort Taggart boomed across the town square. It wasn't officially an auction. Selling women was illegal, even out here, but it felt like one. The men of Iron Creek stood in a semicircle, chewing tobacco and eyeing the new arrivals like they were inspecting horses. One by one, the women who had traveled with Clara were paired off. The pretty blonde from St. Louis went to the banker. The sturdy widow went to the blacksmith. Clara remained. She wasn't ugly, but she was small, terrified, and looked frail. In the Wyoming Territory, frailty was a liability. "Is that the last of 'em?" A voice sneered. It was Caleb Miller, a drunkard with a pistol on his hip that looked worth more than his horse. "She looks like she'd break if a strong wind hit her. I pass." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, burning through the chill wind. She was going to be sent back. If she went back to Chicago, she was dead. "I'll take her." The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Walking through the mud was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the granite of the mountains behind him. He was at least 6'6", wearing a coat made from a massive grizzly bear, the fur still matted and wild. His face was hidden beneath a low-brimmed hat and a thick, dark beard, but what was visible was terrifying. A jagged, purple scar running from his left temple down across his cheek, disappearing into his beard. It was Silas Kincaid, the mountain man. "Silas," Mayor Taggart stammered, his confident demeanor vanishing. We didn't expect you down from the high pass until spring." "Need a wife," Silas grunted. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together deep underground. The women on the platform shrank back. Rumors about Silas Kincaid were the stuff of nightmares. They said he had killed a man with his bare hands for kicking a dog. They said he lived with wolves. They said his last wife, if he ever had one, had simply vanished into the snow. Silas stopped in front of the platform. He didn't look at the mayor. He looked at Clara. His eyes were dark, shadowed by the brim of his hat, unreadable. He held out a hand. It was the size of a shovel, calloused and stained with pine pitch. "She's too small for you, Kincaid," Caleb Miller shouted from the back, emboldened by the whiskey. "She won't last a week up there." Silas turned his head slowly. He didn't speak. He just looked at Miller. The drunkard went pale and took a step back, his hand falling away from his gun. Silas turned back to Clara. He didn't demand. He didn't grab. He just kept that massive hand extended, waiting. Clara looked at the mayor, who refused to meet her eye. She looked at the other women, who were looking at her with pity. She realized she had 2 choices: starve in the street or take the hand of the monster. She remembered her father's words before he died. "Fear is a liar, Clara. Look at what a man does, not how he looks." Taking a breath that rattled in her chest, Clara stepped forward. She placed her small, trembling hand into Silas's giant palm. His fingers closed over hers. She flinched, expecting a crushing grip. Instead, his hold was surprisingly loose, almost careful, as if he knew exactly how fragile she was. "Let's go," he rumbled. As he led her toward a battered wagon pulled by 2 massive mules, Clara felt the eyes of the whole town on her back. She heard the mayor whisper to the banker, "Better start digging a grave for her now. Winter's coming, and nobody survives the high pass with the beast." Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. She didn't look back. She didn't know it yet, but the danger wasn't the man sitting next to her. The danger was already waiting for them in the mountains. The journey up the mountain took 2 days. For the first 6 hours, Silas didn't say a single word. The wagon creaked and groaned over ruts that would have shattered a city carriage. The air grew thinner, colder, biting through Clara's thin wool coat. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He sat immovable, his eyes scanning the tree line constantly. He held the reins with an ease that suggested he could control the mules with a twitch of his pinky finger. Are you going to hurt me?" Clara asked. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Silas pulled the mules to a halt. The sudden silence of the forest was deafening. He turned to look at her. Up close, the scar was even more grotesque, twisting his upper lip slightly. But for the first time, she saw his eyes clearly. They weren't black. They were a startling, clear hazel, flecked with gold. "No," he said. "They said you killed a man," she whispered. "People say a lot of things," he replied. He reached into the back of the wagon and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, clean, unlike his coat, and tossed it to her. "Wrap up. Frostbite takes the toes first." That was the most he spoke until nightfall. They camped in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Clara expected him to demand her duties as a wife immediately. She sat by the fire, her body rigid, clutching the blanket. Silas built the fire, tended the mules, and then set a cast-iron skillet over the flames. He cooked bacon and beans, the smell making Clara's stomach growl violently. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. He handed her a tin plate, heaped full. He took a much smaller portion for himself. "Eat," he said. "Why?" she asked, looking at his plate. "You're twice my size. You need more." "You're starving," he said simply. "I ain't." As she ate, ravenous, she watched him take a piece of wood from his pocket. He pulled out a small knife, not a weapon, but a whittling tool. With delicate, precise movements, he began to shave the wood. The firelight danced on his scar, making it look like a river of shadow. "What are you making?" she asked, her fear slowly being replaced by curiosity. He stopped, his hand closing over the wood to hide it. "Nothing." He stood up abruptly. "Sleep in the wagon. I'll take the ground." "But it's freezing," Clara protested. "You'll die. I'm used to the cold. Wagon bed has straw. It's warmer." He turned his back to her, lying down on the hard earth near the fire, pulling his bear coat tight. Clara climbed into the wagon, burrowing into the straw. She lay awake for hours, listening to the wind and the crackle of the fire. The beast had given her his food and the warmest sleeping spot. Why? She wondered. What does he want from me? The next day, the snow started. It wasn't a gentle dusting. It was a Wyoming whiteout. The world disappeared into a swirling gray void. The wagon slipped and slid on the narrow trail. Suddenly, the wagon lurched violently. The rear wheel had struck a hidden rock. Clara was thrown sideways, nearly tumbling off the edge of the trail into the ravine hundreds of feet below. "Hold on!" Silas roared, a sound that rivaled the thunder. He didn't reach for the reins. He leaped from the moving wagon, landing in the snow. He grabbed the back of the wagon, his boots digging into the frozen mud. With a grunt that sounded like the earth tearing apart, he physically heaved the sliding wagon back onto the trail, his muscles straining against the heavy bear coat. The mules panicked, but Silas was at their heads in a second, speaking low, soothing words. The terrifying beast was gone. In his place was a calm, steady force of nature. He walked back to Clara, who was shaking uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. "You hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with exertion. Clara looked up, tears freezing on her cheeks. You saved me." "Wagon would have tipped," he muttered, dismissing it. He looked at her shivering form. He hesitated, then reached up. With a surprisingly gentle touch, he brushed a snowflake off her eyelashes. "Almost home, Clara," he said, "just a little higher." It was the first time he had used her name. They arrived at the cabin as twilight fell. It wasn't the shack she expected. It was a sturdy, well-built structure of heavy logs, with a stone chimney that puffed welcoming smoke. But as Silas opened the heavy oak door, Clara gasped. The inside wasn't a bachelor's mess. It was clean. There were curtains on the windows, and everywhere, on the mantel, on the table, on shelves, were wooden carvings, hundreds of them, birds, horses, wolves, and children. And in the corner of the room, sitting in a rocking chair, was an old woman. She was holding a shotgun leveled straight at Clara's chest. "Who's this, Silas?" the old woman croaked, her eyes sharp as flint. "You bring the law, or did you bring trouble?" Silas stepped in front of Clara, shielding her body with his own. "Put it down!" Ma, Silas said. She's my wife. The old woman lowered the gun slowly, a toothless grin spreading across her face. Wife? Lord have mercy! Does she know about the boy? Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. What boy? She asked, stepping out from behind Silas. Silas stiffened. He looked at Clara, and the gentle hazel eyes were gone, replaced by a wall of fear. The one we're hiding, Silas said quietly. The one the sheriff wants dead. The cabin was warm, but Clara felt a cold sweat prickling her skin. Silas moved past her, his heavy boots thudding softly on the bearskin rug, and bolted the heavy oak door. He dropped a thick iron bar across brackets that looked strong enough to hold back a stampede. Ma, put the gun away, Silas repeated, his voice weary. She's staying! The old woman, Etta Kincaid, lowered the shotgun but didn't engage the safety. She spat into a tin cup by her feet. City girl. She looks like she'd faint if she saw a chicken get its neck wrung. She ain't built for this, Silas. She'll turn on us the minute O'Malley shows his badge. Who is O'Malley? Clara asked, her voice trembling but firm. She refused to cower. She had survived the Chicago slums. She wouldn't let a mountain grandmother intimidate her. Silas didn't answer. He walked to the wooden ladder that led to the loft. He tapped the wood 3 times, a rhythmic signal. Tap, tap, tap. It's safe, Toby, Silas called out softly. The tone of his voice broke Clara's heart. It was the voice of a father soothing a nightmare. A moment later, a pair of small, dusty boots appeared on the ladder. A boy, no older than 7, climbed down. He was thin, his clothes patched with deer hide. But what struck Clara most was the bruise fading on his jaw and the terrifying emptiness in his eyes. He looked at Clara with the wariness of a trapped animal. This is Clara, Silas said, gesturing to her with an open hand. She's family. The boy didn't speak. He rushed past Clara and buried his face in Etta's apron. The old woman's demeanor changed instantly. The hard edges melted away as she stroked the boy's hair with a hand gnarled by arthritis. This is Toby, Silas said, turning to Clara. He took off his heavy coat, revealing a flannel shirt stretched tight over massive shoulders. He hasn't spoken a word in 6 months. Clara looked between the 3 of them. Is he your son? No, Silas said. He walked over to the fire and poured coffee from a blackened pot. He's the witness. Clara sat at the rough-hewn table, her legs weak. Witness to what? Silas sat opposite her. In the firelight, the scar on his face seemed less jagged, softened by the weariness in his expression. Town thinks I killed a prospector named Jebediah Rark over a dispute about a gold claim. They say I crushed his skull with a rock. Clara gripped the edge of the table. Did you? I killed him, Silas admitted. Clara's breath hitched. But not for gold. I was coming down the ridge, checking my traps. I heard screaming. Rark had Toby. He was hurting the boy. Bad. Rark was drunk, claiming the boy stole from his sluice box. Silas looked down at his large hands. I pulled Rark off. He pulled a knife. We struggled. He fell back, hit his head on the sluice, died instantly. It was self-defense, Clara said. The sheriff would understand that. Etta let out a dry, bitter laugh from the rocking chair. Sheriff Declan O'Malley? That snake? Jebediah Rark was O'Malley's brother-in-law, and O'Malley doesn't care about justice. He cares that Rark was holding the deed to the Copperhead mine. When Rark died, the deed disappeared. Silas looked Clara in the eye. O'Malley thinks I stole the deed. He thinks I killed Rark for the mine and that I'm holding the boy hostage to keep him quiet. If he finds Toby, he kills him to tie up the loose ends. If he finds me, I hang. Clara looked at the little boy, Toby, who was now watching her with wide, fearful eyes. She realized then that the beast of Big Horn wasn't a monster. He was a guardian. He had endured the town's hatred, the isolation, and the rumors just to keep a mute orphan alive. Why bring me here? Clara whispered. If you're hiding, why bring a stranger? Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden carving he had been working on the night before. He placed it on the table. It was a perfect, miniature sparrow, wings spread as if to take flight. Winter is here, Silas said quietly. Ma is sick. She can't chase Toby if he runs, and she can't hold the rifle like she used to. I have to hunt, or we starve. I needed someone to watch them, someone the town wouldn't suspect. You needed a cover, Clara said, feeling a strange mix of hurt and admiration. I needed a partner, Silas corrected her. His gaze dropped to her hands. I saw you at the station. You were terrified, but you stood your ground against Caleb Miller. You have grit, Clara. I'm betting my life and the boys on it. For the next 2 weeks, the snow didn't stop. The cabin became a small, enclosed world. Clara expected hardship, but she found a strange, quiet rhythm. She learned that Silas rose before dawn to chop wood, the rhythmic thwack-thwack acting as their morning alarm. She learned that he left the best cuts of meat for Toby and Etta. She also learned about the carvings. The cabin was filled with them because they were Silas's way of talking to Toby. When Toby was scared, Silas would carve a bear to guard him. When Toby was sad, Silas carved a sun. One evening, while Etta was asleep and Toby was playing with the wooden sparrow by the hearth, Clara found Silas sharpening his axe in the corner. "You're good with him," she said softly. Silas didn't look up. "He's broken. Takes time to fix broken things. Is that why you picked me?" Clara asked, stepping closer. "Because I'm broken too?" Silas paused. He looked up, and the intensity in his hazel eyes took her breath away. "You ain't broken, Clara. You're just bent. Wood that bends is stronger than wood that snaps. It survives the storm." He reached out, his rough thumb grazing her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of flour. The touch was electric. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. Clara leaned into his hand, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Silas," she breathed. The moment was shattered by the sound of a horse whinnying outside. Then came the barking of a dog, not a wolf, but a hound. Silas extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging the room into darkness lit only by the dying embers of the fire. "Get Toby in the hole," Silas whispered, his voice a low growl. Now, the hole wasn't the attic. It was a false bottom in the root cellar, beneath a barrel of salted pork. Clara's heart hammered in her throat as she ushered Toby down the trapdoor. The boy didn't cry. He was trained for this. He curled into a ball in the dark, damp space, clutching the wooden sparrow. Clara replaced the boards, dragged the heavy barrel back in place, and scrambled up the ladder into the main room just as a heavy fist pounded on the door. "Open up! Kincaid!" It was a voice that oozed false politeness. Sheriff Declan O'Malley. Silas stood by the fireplace, his posture relaxed, but Clara saw the tension in his jaw. He was whittling again, the knife steady in his hand. "Doors unlocked," Silas called out. The door swung open, letting in a swirl of snow and freezing wind. Sheriff O'Malley stepped in, followed by 2 deputies. One of them was Caleb Miller, the drunk from the train station. O'Malley was a handsome man in a serpentine way, with a mustache waxed to perfection and eyes that missed nothing. "Evening, Silas," O'Malley said, shaking the snow off his duster. He looked around the cabin, his eyes lingering on the carvings, then on Etta, and finally landing on Clara. "Well now," O'Malley smiled, stepping closer to Clara. "The rumors are true. The beast found a beauty." Clara forced herself to curtsy, remembering her father's lessons on manners, even in the face of the devil. "Good evening, Sheriff. Can I offer you coffee?" O'Malley ignored the offer. He walked around the room, picking up a carved wooden horse and inspecting it. "We're looking for a runaway, Mrs. Kincaid. A little boy. Thief. Stole from the church poor box. We tracked prints up the ridge." "No boys here," Silas rumbled. "Just us. Is that right?" O'Malley turned to Caleb. "Check the loft." "You got a warrant?" Silas asked, standing up. He towered over the sheriff. "I got a badge," O'Malley snapped, "and I got a report that you were seen buying children's clothes in Iron Creek 2 months back. For the orphanage," Silas lied smoothly. "Sent them down with the parson." Caleb Miller came down from the loft. "Nothing up there, Sheriff. Just dust." O'Malley's eyes narrowed. He walked over to Clara. He stood too close, smelling of whiskey and bay rum. "You seem like a good Christian woman, Clara. You wouldn't harbor a fugitive, would you? Even if your husband told you to?" Clara looked O'Malley in the eye. She thought of Toby shaking in the dark. She thought of Silas brushing the snow from her lashes. "My husband is a good man," Clara said, her voice ringing clear. "We have nothing to hide. Feel free to check the cellar. Though all you'll find is potatoes and my winter preserves." It was a gamble, a massive one. O'Malley stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. Then he smiled. "The cellar! Good idea!" He signaled to the 3rd deputy. "Check it." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. If they moved the pork barrel... The deputy opened the cellar door and went down with a lantern. Silas's hand tightened on the whittling knife. He was calculating the distance. If he moved, he'd have to kill all 3. Clara saw the shift in his stance. The preparation for violence. "No," she thought. "Please, God, no!" The deputy shouted from below. "Sheriff, come look at this!" O'Malley's eyes lit up with triumph. "Aha!" He glared at Silas. "Don't move," O'Malley descended the ladder. The cabin was silent. Etta was praying in a whisper. Silas looked at Clara, a silent apology in his eyes. He shifted his weight, ready to charge. Then O'Malley laughed. He climbed back up the ladder, holding a jar of preserved peaches. "Well," O'Malley said, looking at the jar, "you weren't lying about the preserves, Mrs. Kincaid. Looks like my deputy is just hungry." The deputy climbed up, shrugging. "Thought I saw a shadow, Sheriff. Was just a rat behind the barrels." Clara's knees nearly gave out. They hadn't moved the pork barrel. O'Malley set the jar down. He looked disappointed, but his eyes were still suspicious. He walked to the door. "We'll be going. But Silas, I'm watching you. Snow melts. Secrets thaw." He turned to Clara. "Be careful, darling. Bears turn on their masters eventually." With that, they left, the door slamming shut against the wind. Silas waited until the sound of the horses faded completely. He rushed to the window, watching the trail. Then he turned to Clara. He crossed the room in 2 strides and grabbed her shoulders. "You invited them into the cellar?" He hissed, though his voice was shaking. "Are you crazy? I had to!" Clara argued, her adrenaline spiking. "If I hesitated, he would have known. I had to bluff him. I knew the barrel was too heavy for one man to move easily without a reason." Silas stared at her. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by something else. Awe. "You have ice in your veins, Clara Sutcliffe," he whispered. "Clara Kincaid," she corrected him. For the first time, Silas smiled. It wasn't a guarded smile. It was genuine, transforming his scarred face into something handsome. He pulled the trapdoor open. "Toby? You can come out." There was no answer. "Toby?" Silas dropped into the cellar. "Silas!" Clara heard him shout. "Bring the light!" Clara grabbed the lantern and scrambled down. Silas was standing by the pork barrel. It hadn't been moved by the deputies, but the false floorboards next to it were pried open. The hole was empty. "He's gone," Silas said, his face pale. "But the deputies didn't take him. If they had, they would have arrested us." Clara shone the light into the hole. There was a tunnel, a small, narrow tunnel dug through the dirt, leading out under the foundation cabin. "He dug out," Silas realized. "He must have been digging for weeks." Clara saw a piece of paper, rough parchment, pinned to the dirt wall of the hole with a sharp rock. She grabbed it. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of the mountain range, and a specific peak marked with an X. It was the peak known as Dead Man's Drop, and below the drawing, written in shaky, childish letters, were the first words Toby had communicated in 6 months. "I know W.H. year, He Goldis, Clara less." Clara looked at Silas. "The gold? I thought you said Rark died over a claim dispute that wasn't real?" Silas's face hardened. The twist had landed. "It wasn't real to me," Silas said darkly. "But Rark was looking for something. Legend says a Confederate shipment of gold bars was stolen and buried in these mountains 10 years ago. Rark thought Toby knew where it was." Silas looked at the tunnel, then at the storm raging outside. "The boy didn't run away because he was scared of the sheriff," Silas said, grabbing his rifle. "He ran away to trade. He's going to give O'Malley the gold in exchange for our lives." "He's 7 years old," Clara cried. "He'll freeze to death before he gets halfway there." "Not if I catch him first," Silas said. He looked at Clara. "Stay here with Ma." "No," Clara said, grabbing her coat. She picked up the shotgun Etta had left by the chair. "I'm the only one small enough to follow his tracks through the brush without sinking. And you said it yourself, Silas." "Said what?" "We're partners." Silas looked at her, then at the gun. He nodded once. "Let's ride!" The wind on the high pass didn't blow. It screamed. It was a physical weight, pressing against Clara's chest, trying to push her off the narrow, icy trail that wound up the side of the mountain. They had left the mules 3 miles back, tethered in a sheltered grove of aspens. The terrain had become too steep, too slick, with black ice for the animals. Now, it was just Silas and Clara, battling the whiteout on foot. Silas walked ahead, breaking the trail. He was a dark, hulking shape in the swirling snow, moving with a determination that defied the elements. He had tied a rope around his waist, the other end loop-knotted around Clara's. It was the only thing keeping her from vanishing into the gray void if she slipped. "Keep moving, Clara!" Silas shouted over the roar of the wind. "Don't stop! You stop! You die!" Clara's lungs burned with every breath. The cold was a sharp knife in her chest. Her legs, buried to the knees in drifts with every step, felt like lead. But she kept her eyes on Silas's back. He was her anchor. They had found Toby's tracks an hour ago. Small, shallow depressions in the snow that were rapidly filling up. The boy was light, which helped him stay atop the crust, but he was small. The cold would take him faster than it would take a grown man. How much further? Clara gasped, stumbling. The rope went taut, catching her. Silas turned, hauling her upright with a single pull. He grabbed her shoulders, his face inches from hers. Ice had formed in his beard, making him look like an ancient statue. "Dead Man's Drop is just over the ridge," he yelled. "Half a mile. Can you make it?" "I can make it," she lied. She couldn't feel her toes. Silas looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He saw the truth. He didn't say a word. He simply turned around, unbuttoned the massive bearskin coat, and pulled her inside it with him. For a moment, they stood there, wrapped together in the fur. The heat radiating from his body was intense, a furnace in the middle of an icebox. Clara pressed her face against his flannel shirt, smelling pine, wood smoke, and the musk of a man who worked the earth. She felt his heart beating, slow, strong, steady. "Thaw out," he commanded, his voice rumbling through his chest against her ear. "Just for a minute." "Silas," she mumbled into his shirt. "If we don't find him, we will," he said. His arms tightened around her. "I promised I'd keep you safe. That includes keeping your heart safe. Losing that boy would break it." Clara looked up at him. The scar on his face was stark white against his wind-burned skin. "How did you get it?" she asked softly. "The scar. The town says a bear. You said it wasn't." Silas looked away, staring into the storm. "Wasn't a bear. It was O'Malley. 10 years ago, before he was sheriff. We were partners on a claim. We found silver. Not a lot, but enough. He got greedy. Came at me with a shovel while I was sleeping. Split my face open. Left me for dead in the ravine." Clara gasped. "He tried to kill you?" "I survived," Silas said grimly. "Crawled 5 miles to Entrapper's hut. By the time I got back to town, O'Malley had registered the claim in his name and pinned the assault on a drifter he'd run out of town. Who was going to believe the word of a half-dead mountain man against the charm of Declan O'Malley?" He looked back at her. "That's why he hates me. Because I'm the only one breathing who knows what he really is. A coward and a thief. And now he wants the gold Toby found," Clara realized. "He wants the gold," Silas nodded. "But mostly, he wants to finish the job he started 10 years ago." He buttoned the coat back up, sealing the warmth in, but kept her close. "Let's go." "We're close." They crested the ridge 20 minutes later. The wind here was ferocious, stripping the snow from the rock. Below them lay a terrifying geological formation, Dead Man's Drop. It was a sheer cliff face with a narrow, crumbling ledge that led to a small cave entrance about 50 feet down. "There!" Silas pointed. Clara squinted through the stinging sleet. On the ledge, huddled against the rock face, was a small bundle of rags. "Toby!" she screamed, the sound torn away by the wind. The bundle moved. Toby raised his head. He was alive, but barely. "Stay here," Silas ordered Clara, unhooking the rope. "The ledge won't hold both of us. I'll go get him." "Silas, look!" Clara grabbed his arm. On the other side of the ravine, emerging from the tree line, were 3 horses. Sheriff O'Malley and his deputies. They had taken the logging road, a longer route, but one passable by horse. They were below the ledge, looking up. O'Malley spotted them instantly. He drew his Winchester rifle from its scabbard. "Kincaid!" O'Malley's voice boomed, carried strangely by the acoustics of the canyon. "Step away from the ledge." Silas ignored him. He stepped onto the icy shelf, moving toward Toby. Crack! A bullet chipped the rock inches from Silas's head. Silas froze. He looked down into the canyon. O'Malley had his rifle trained on him. The distance was about 200 yards. A difficult shot in this wind, but not impossible. "I said step away!" O'Malley shouted. "The boy is mine!" "The gold is mine." Silas looked at Toby, who was shivering violently, clutching a rusted iron box. Then he looked at O'Malley. "He's a child, Declan!" Silas roared. "He's freezing to death! Let me get him off the ledge!" "Kick the box down first!" O'Malley yelled back. "Throw me the gold, and I'll let you walk away!" Silas looked at the box in Toby's hands. He looked at the unstable rock beneath the boy's feet. "I can't reach him!" Silas yelled. "The ledge is crumbling!" "Then you better hurry and make a choice, beast!" O'Malley laughed, racking the lever of his rifle. "The gold or the boy!" Clara, crouching behind a boulder on the ridge, felt a cold clarity wash over her. She looked at the shotgun in her hands. It was a short-range weapon, useless against O'Malley at this distance. But she wasn't aiming for O'Malley. "Silas!" Clara screamed. "Go!" Silas didn't hesitate. He lunged across the ice toward Toby. O'Malley fired. The bullet struck Silas in the shoulder. He spun around, blood spraying onto the white snow, but his momentum carried him forward. He slammed into the rock wall next to Toby, shielding the boy with his massive body. "Silas!" Clara cried out, scrambling from cover. "Stay back!" Silas gritted out, his face pale, clutching his shoulder. Below, O'Malley cursed. "Reloading! Caleb, take the shot!" Clara saw Caleb Miller raising his rifle. She had seconds. She didn't shoot at the men. She looked up. Above the deputies, on the steep canyon wall, was a massive overhang of snow. A cornice, heavy and unstable, built up by the blizzard. Clara aimed the shotgun not at the men, but straight up into the air. Boom! The sound echoed like a cannon shot in the ravine. The vibration hit the cornice. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble began. A crack appeared in the snow above O'Malley's head. "Avalanche!" Caleb screamed. The wall of white descended. The roar of the avalanche was deafening. It wasn't a slide. It was a waterfall of ice and rock. O'Malley and his deputies spurred their horses, scrambling desperately toward the shelter of the tree line. The white wave crashed down where they had been standing seconds before, burying the trail in 10 feet of snow. The vibration shook the ledge where Silas and Toby huddled. "Hold on!" Silas yelled, wrapping his good arm around the boy and pressing him into the shallow depression of the cave entrance. Dust and snow billowed up, blinding them. When the air finally cleared, the ravine below was changed. The trail was gone. The deputies were gone, either buried or fled. But they weren't safe. The avalanche had destabilized the ledge. An ominous creak echoed through the stone beneath Silas's boots. "Clara!" Silas shouted, his voice strained with pain. "The rope! Throw the rope!" Clara scrambled to the edge of the cliff. She tied the rope to a sturdy pine tree root, tested it, and threw the other end down to the ledge. "Tie it around Toby!" Clara commanded. Silas, grimacing as blood soaked the shoulder of his coat, fumbled with the knot. His left arm hung uselessly. With one hand and his teeth, he managed to secure the rope around the boy's waist. "Pull him up!" Silas yelled. Clara pulled. She was small, but years of scrubbing floors in Chicago had given her deceptive strength. She dug her heels into the frozen earth and hauled. Toby scrambled up the rock face, helping where he could, clutching the iron box against his chest like a lifeline. He crested the rim and collapsed into the snow, gasping, "Silas!" Clara threw the rope back down. "Grab it!" Silas reached for the rope. But as he shifted his weight, a loud crack thundered through the stone. A 3-foot section of the ledge broke away, tumbling into the abyss. Silas slipped. "No!" Clara lunged forward, grabbing the rope with both hands just as it snapped taut. The weight of the massive mountain man nearly yanked her over the edge. She slammed into the ground, sliding toward the precipice. Her boots caught on the same pine root she had used as an anchor. She held on. Her muscles screamed. Silas dangled over the drop, gripping the rope with his one good hand, his feet swinging in empty air. "Let go, Clara!" Silas rasped, looking up at her. "You can't pull me up! You'll go over with me! Shut up!" Clara grit her teeth, tears freezing on her face. "I am not a widow yet. Silas Kincaid, climb!" "I can't," he groaned, shoulders gone. "Then hold on." Clara looked at Toby. The boy was staring at them, terrified. "Toby, help me!" The boy dropped the box. He rushed to the rope, grabbing it behind Clara. He was small, but his weight added just enough friction. "Pull!" Clara screamed. Inch by agonizing inch, they worked. Silas kicked his legs, finding purchase on the slick rock wall, pushing himself up while they pulled. His breath came in ragged gasps. Finally, a massive hand slapped onto the snowy rim. Then another. With a final, guttural roar of effort, Silas hauled himself over the edge and collapsed onto the solid ground. Clara fell back into the snow, her chest heaving, her hands raw and bleeding inside her gloves. Silas rolled onto his back, staring up at the gray sky. He reached out with his good hand. Clara crawled over to him, collapsing onto his chest. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You crazy woman," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You stubborn, crazy woman. I told you," she sobbed, burying her face in his neck. "I'm your partner." Toby sat up. He crawled over to the iron box he had dropped. He pushed it toward them. Silas groaned, sitting up wincing. He looked at the box. It was a Confederate strongbox, rusted shut. "Is it real?" Silas asked. "Is it the gold?" Toby picked up a rock and smashed the rusted lock. It took 3 hits before the latch gave way. He opened the lid. Silas and Clara leaned in. There were no gold bars. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of paper, deeds, ledgers, and a pile of letters. Silas picked up a ledger. He flipped through the pages. His eyes widened. "It ain't gold," Silas said, a dry laugh escaping his lips. "It's better. This is Rark's insurance policy." "What is it?" Clara asked. "It's a record," Silas said, scanning the handwriting. Rark was the town treasurer before he went prospecting. "This book, it details every dollar Declan O'Malley stole from Iron Creek for the last 15 years. Taxes, land seizures, fines. And this," he held up a deed. "This is the deed to the Copperhead mine. It wasn't lost. Rark hid it here to keep O'Malley from getting it. So Toby didn't find a treasure," Clara whispered. "He found the truth. He found O'Malley's noose," Silas corrected. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Clara screamed. Dirt kicked up inches from the box. They spun around. Emerging from the snowy tree line, battered, bruised, and limping, was Sheriff O'Malley. He had lost his horse. He had lost his hat. Blood trickled down his forehead. But he still had his revolver. "I'll take that box," O'Malley hissed, aiming the gun at Clara's head. "And then I'll take the pleasure of burying you all in this snow." Silas tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The blood loss was taking its toll. "It's over, Declan," Silas said, his voice weak. "We saw the ledger. The whole territory will know. Dead men tell no tales," O'Malley sneered, "and neither do mute brats." He cocked the hammer. Clara's shotgun was 5 feet away, lying in the snow. Too far. O'Malley's finger tightened on the trigger. "No!" The scream didn't come from Silas. And it didn't come from Clara. It came from Toby. The boy who hadn't spoken a word in 6 months stood up. He didn't look like a scared child anymore. He looked furious. "No!" Toby screamed again, his voice cracking with disuse but loud and clear. The shock on O'Malley's face was total. For a split second, he hesitated, his eyes flicking to the boy. That split second was all Clara needed. She didn't dive for the shotgun. She reached into her boot. Throughout the journey, she had carried a small, secret weapon. Not a gun, but the carving knife Silas had given her to cut dried meat. She threw it. She wasn't a knife thrower. She was a desperate woman defending her family. The knife didn't hit O'Malley in the heart. It didn't need to. It struck him in the thigh, burying deep. O'Malley howled, his leg buckling. His shot went wild, pinging off the rocks. Before he could recover, a gray blur launched itself from the tree line. It wasn't a person. It was a wolf, a massive timber wolf with scarred ears. "Timber!" Silas shouted. The wolf, the one rumors said Silas lived with, had been tracking them, or protecting them, all along. It hit O'Malley in the chest, knocking him backward over the ridge. O'Malley screamed as he tumbled off the edge of Dead Man's Drop, vanishing into the white abyss below. Silence returned to the mountain. The wolf stood on the edge, looking down, then turned and trotted over to Silas. It licked the blood on his hand once, then sat down in the snow, watching them. Clara rushed to Silas. "Silas! You're bleeding out. I'm all right," he whispered, his eyes closing. "Toby!" He spoke. Clara looked at the boy. Toby was crying, but he was standing tall. He walked over to Silas and placed a small hand on the giant man's cheek. "Home!" Toby whispered. "Go home!" "Yeah!" Silas rasped, smiling weakly before darkness took him. "Let's go home!" Getting down the mountain was harder than climbing it. Silas was a dead weight, drifting in and out of consciousness. The bullet had missed the artery, but he had lost too much blood. Clara, who days ago had been afraid to look a cow in the eye, became a woman of iron. She lashed Silas to a makeshift travois made from pine boughs and the rope, harnessing herself and the now silent wolf, Timber, to pull him. Toby walked ahead, breaking the path, clutching the iron box of evidence against his chest. They didn't reach the cabin until well past midnight. Etta was waiting at the door, her shotgun replaced by a lantern. She took one look at her bleeding son and the fierce determination in Clara's eyes, and she didn't say a word. She just boiled water. For 3 days, the beast of Big Horn lay in a fever dream. Clara didn't sleep. She washed his wound, sewed the torn flesh with Etta's darning needle, and spoon-fed him broth. She listened to him mutter in his sleep, not about monsters or murder, but about a woman with eyes like the sky and a hand small enough to fit inside his heart. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Silas opened his eyes. The room was bright with winter sun reflecting off the snow. The first thing he saw was Clara, asleep in the rocking chair next to his bed, her hand resting on the quilt near his knee. He tried to sit up, groaning. Clara woke instantly. "Don't move," she ordered, rushing to his side. Her voice had changed. It wasn't the whisper of a frightened girl anymore. It was the command of the lady of the house. "The boy?" Silas rasped. "Safe," Clara said, pouring him water. "He's outside helping Etta with the wood. And he's talking, Silas. Not a lot, but enough." Silas drank the water, his eyes never leaving her face. "And O'Malley?" "Found," Clara said softly. "Caleb Miller came up yesterday with the mayor. They found O'Malley's body at the bottom of the drop. They also found the ledger." Silas tensed. And they know the truth," she said, smoothing the hair back from his forehead. "They know Rourke was a thief. They know O'Malley was worse. Caleb confessed everything about the frame-up 10 years ago to save his own skin." Clara reached onto the bedside table and picked up a piece of paper. "The mayor brought this. It's a formal apology, and a deed to the land surrounding the cabin. You own it free and clear, Silas. No one will ever hunt you again." Silas looked at the paper, then back at Clara. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he looked terrified. "So it's over," he said heavily. "Yes, you're free," Silas said, looking away toward the window. "You held up your end of the bargain. You kept the boy safe. You cleared my name. You don't have to stay in this cabin, Clara. You can take the reward money from the town and go back to Chicago. Or St. Louis. Somewhere with paved roads and no wolves." The silence in the room was thick. Clara stood up slowly. She walked to the window and looked out at the pristine white valley. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "You want me to leave?" Silas swallowed hard. "I'm a scarred man, Clara. I live in the dirt. I ain't a prize." Clara turned around. She walked back to the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress. She took his large, rough hand in hers. "You're right," she said. "You're not a prize. You're the man who gave his blanket to a stranger. You're the man who carved 100 toys for a broken boy. You're the man who jumped off a cliff to save us." She lifted his hand and pressed her lips to his scarred knuckles. "I don't want Chicago, Silas. I don't want paved roads. I want the man with the gentle heart." Silas looked at her, his hazel eyes shining with tears he refused to shed. "I'm the beast of Bighorn, Clara." "Not anymore," she whispered, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "Now, you're just my husband." Spring, 1877. The snow didn't leave until May. When it finally retreated, it revealed a world of green grass and wildflowers. The cabin was different now. There were new curtains. A garden patch was being tilled out back. And the silence that had once haunted the Kincaid homestead was gone, replaced by the sound of laughter. On the porch, Silas sat whittling. He wasn't hiding his face anymore. The scar was there, but he wore it without shame. "Look, Pa! Look!" Toby ran up the steps, holding a handful of bluebells. He didn't stutter. He didn't hide. "For Ma?" Silas asked, his voice a low, happy rumble. "For Ma," Toby nodded. The door opened, and Clara stepped out, wiping flour from her hands. She looked healthier, stronger, her cheeks rosy with the mountain air. She took the flowers from Toby and kissed the top of his head. Then she looked at Silas. The look that passed between them was hotter than the summer sun. "Dinner's ready," she said. Silas stood up. He put his arm around his wife, pulling her close. He looked out at the valley, then down at the woman who had saved his life, not with a gun, but with love. "Coming home," Silas said. And for the first time in his life, he truly was. And that, my friends, is the legend of Silas and Clara. They say if you go up to the Bighorn Range today, you can still find the foundation of that old cabin. Some folks say they found gold up there, but the real treasure wasn't in that iron box. It was the courage to see the human being behind the scars. Silas Kincaid spent 10 years thinking he was a monster because the world told him he was. It took one woman, one desperate, brave woman, to hold up a mirror and show him he was a hero. It just goes to show, the coldest winters often bring the warmest springs, and sometimes the people everyone else throws away are the ones worth keeping the most. If this story touched your heart, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It helps get these stories out to more people who need a little hope. And if you want more tales of the Wild West, true romance, and grit, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. I've got a story coming up next week about a gambler who bet his soul on a single hand of cards. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening. Stay wild, and I'll see you on the trail.